Begin by praising and glorifying Allah Azza wa Jalla, the most exalted, the most high, the most honorable. We thank Him and beseech Him and ask Him and implore Him for His guidance in this life and for His mercy in the next. I know, mashallah ta'ala, it's the summer, July 8th. Very hot outside. I don't know how you guys all got up from your AC before 4 o'clock in the afternoon during the summer. Mashallah. So you guys should all, first and foremost, give all yourselves a round of applause. Very loud round of applause. 11 o'clock coming to our conference. I know when I was in high school, definitely that's not what I would be doing on a Sunday. But mashallah, may Allah bless all of you. Very, very proud and honored to be here. Ask Allah to accept all the brothers. I mean, I know I'm the first speaker, but you guys should give props to all the organizers and all the brothers and sisters doing a lot of the efforts behind the scenes, making this beautiful day for all of us here, inshallah ta'ala. So I was given obviously first hard task. I'm the first speaker. And so I'm going to try to set up, the theme is better family, better society. So I'm going to try to give you an image, a Spider-Man version, high def, real picture TV version of the best society before we work on making a better family and a better society. And so this society, and we've all heard it, is a mythical fairy tale stories that we hear, maybe bedtime or Sunday Quran school. We hear about this great world that once upon a time that lived, called the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, his sahaba, his crew, his boys. And so they lived, brothers and sisters, if you know, and we do know, 1433 years ago. And I want to give you the picture or shift the lens to the image of 5 years after the Prophet and between 50 and 80 companions. They ran away from Mecca, they left Mecca and they traveled to Medina to establish a civilization that was very small, the comparison to today, if you've been to Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina today, the masjid today, just the masjid itself is 15 times bigger than the original masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. So they moved to a very small, remote place in the middle of the desert. And it was between 50 and 80 Sahaba that traveled with the Prophet after 13 years of da'wah. After second year of Hijrah, second year that they left to Medina, we know the Battle of Badr. The third year, Battle of Uhud. The fifth year, I want to give you the image of the fifth year. 5 years after the Prophet migrates with his companions to Medina, the Prophet ﷺ is besieged. All of the tribes of the Arabian Peninsula, for one of the very, very few times in their history, they all decide to come together and to crush Islam. And they form what we know in our history as the Ahzab, the great forces of the Arabs, 10,000 strong, and they encircle Medina to crush Islam and the Muslims until the end of time. And so the Prophet ﷺ left with only 300 men to take on the forces of 10,000, was given the victory not through a battle, not through an actual conflict, but by Allah and the perseverance of the companions. Allah gave them victory, 5th year of Hijrah. From the 5th year with 300 men. In 3 years, the Prophet would stroll into Mecca with 10,000 strong, the conquest of Mecca. In less than 5 years, brothers and sisters, Islam spread throughout the entire Arabian Peninsula. In less than 5 years. And then as soon as the Prophet ﷺ, he died sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the civilization collapsed completely. Everybody left Islam except 3 cities, Mecca, Medina, and Ta'if. And then this, again, giving this important perspective, this important history in talking about the diamonds that we should follow, the role models that we should emulate. The Prophet ﷺ, he dies and the civilization collapses. And in 2 years, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, he reestablishes all of the Arabian Peninsula back to Islam. Then he takes on the 2 greatest forces of the world, Persia and Rome. And in less, my brothers and sisters, in less than 100 years, by 90, after 14th of Hijrah, after the 14th year of Hijrah, the Muslims, they were only about 100,000 Muslims. that took on the great Roman Empire in the Battle of Yarmouk that were 300,000 strong. In the Battle of Qadisiyah, 15th year after Hijrah, the Muslims were almost 100,000 as well, and they took on 200,000. And in those two great battles, the Muslims won so easily. And in less than 90 years, the Muslims were all the way from Spain to India and everything in between. So if you ever looked at history, if you ever read a book of ancient Greece or ancient Rome or ancient Persia, we understand even in our own country here, it takes hundreds and thousands of years for civilization to become great. It takes long time, lot of effort, lot of strife, lot of conflict. But the Muslims were able to rule the world with their beauty and their grace and their justice in less than 80 years. Less than 80 years. And so the idealistic society, the best society that ever existed was raised on the shoulders of men and women just like me and you. Young people that the Prophet Muhammad, the greatest teacher to ever exist, he built this great society on people that were very young. So when the Prophet was told, give this message to the world, he didn't freak out and his knees didn't start to shake. He just went and he started to talk to 9 or 10-year-old Ali and Mus'ab and all these young people that would eventually become the leaders of the future, and eventually we become the greatest men and women to ever walk on the face of the earth. And so some of the lessons that I want to share today, because their stories are great. Their legacies are stitched in time forever. But the important thing is our legacy or our future and what we will do with that. So I wanted to share, inshallah, just some very brief lessons to set up the rest of the day for you guys here, inshallah. The first of them, what made the companions so great? Why were they so marvelous? Why were they extraordinary? What made them particularly distinguished? And it wasn't the number of championships that they had on their rings, i.e. the LeBrons and Kobe's of the world. It wasn't how many Grammys they won, i.e. the Drakes and the Rihannas of the world. It wasn't how many Oscars they won, i.e. the Angelina Jolies and Brad Pitts of the world. It wasn't about these superficial things. It was about beautiful internal things that they embodied. The first of them, the first important one to remember for today, the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, they always put the akhirah first. They always focused on something called the next life, the akhirah. And they were always sincere and willing to do whatever it took to get to there and to become great in that area of their world, in that area of their life. And so when Hassan radiallahu anhu, the son of Ali bin Abi Talib, one day they saw him, he was crying in the street. And so they asked him, his friends, his boys, we don't really cry, we give this assumption that sissies cry or babies cry. But can you imagine you're sitting in a street corner one day in front of your house and you're just pouring tears? And so his friends come up to him like, man, what's wrong with you? What's going on, man? What happened? Heartbroken? She dumped you, man? What? Oh man, your Xbox fell on the floor and they crashed into 1,000 pieces. Your iPad retina display cracked its screen. What happened? And he was sitting there crying. They said things like that, but he told them, no. I started, look how focused he was. He doesn't cry over these silly things. He said, I started to think about a fire, a campfire, if you will. And I understood that whenever you start a barbecue or you start a campfire, you don't put a big log and try to light it. You get simple little twigs and pieces of sticks and you put them together and you start the fire with it. And then to sustain the fire, you put in these big, gigantic logs to keep the fire burning all night. So Hassan radiallahu anhu, may Allah be pleased with him, the son of Ali, the son of Abu Talib, he said, then I started to think about the hellfire. And I thought to myself, maybe Allah will ignite the hellfire. Like the beautiful verses that Zakir wrote. Allah Azza wa Jalla tells us, Qu anfusakum wa ahlikum nar. Save yourselves and your families from this fire. وَقُودُهَا النَّاسُ وَالْحِجَارَةُ. What keeps it lit is the bodies of people. So he said, I think that the first people Allah will ignite the hellfire with are the young people. Because being a young person is not being silly and stupid through high school, going to college and being confused and lost, graduating college and living in your mother's basement until you're 35 years old, until you get your PhD, and then okay, now you can get married. That's not what being a youth is about in our deen. Our deen tells us the first thing, the second question every human being will be asked about on the day that they stand in front of Allah, when they are naked and uncircumcised, is that they will be asked about their youth and what they did with it. The Prophet ﷺ told us on a day when we can't walk outside, it's 100 degrees, it's a heat wave coming through New York, and we can't stand outside in the sun for about 5-10 minutes without pouring sweat. Imagine standing for 50,000 years and the sun is right above your head and people are drowning in their sweat. But the Prophet ﷺ, he told us, guys, there's a VIP club that you're allowed to enter. That one of it, it's the only shade in the horizon. There is no shade other than the shade of His throne, Allah the Most High, on that day. And one of the categories of those that will be in this VIP club that you can't enter, not because you know somebody or not because you have a Ferrari, but because, as the Prophet ﷺ told us, a young person, a young woman or a young man that grew up on the deen of Allah, they will be a part of this elite club under the shade of Allah's throne on the Day of Judgment. So being a young person is not about being silly and stupid. It's about being serious like Hassan was. So he said to himself, man, the hellfire, that's what I care about. I'm not going to sit and cry over a boy or a text, or man, she didn't put a heart in a text message, or yeah, how come I didn't, get my bicycle that my dad wanted to get me, or how come I can't drive? I know you guys are, mashallah, Staten Island. I know maybe a lot of people in Staten Island, everybody drives by, they're like 17, you guys got BMWs and M3s, right? MashaAllah. I had a bicycle when I was 17, right? And it was like a cheap Toys R Us version. But subhanAllah, they didn't cry over these materialistic things. They were willing, these young people, the Aishas and the Asma's, the Bilals and the Khabbabs, these people were willing to sacrifice anything for the Akhirah, number one. And they were sincere in doing it. Number two, very important principle as well. The Sahaba, brothers and sisters, actually I should say sisters and brothers. The Sahaba, they had high goals and ambitions. They weren't bums. They weren't happy with getting their GED and like, alright man, I'm trying to make it by. Brother Rami, I'm just, I'm trying to, check the check. The Sahaba, brothers and sisters, they had lofty expectations. They strove to be great not only in the Akhirah, but also in this life. So can you imagine a man like Rabi' bin Amir? Yeah, he was a lot like many of us in here, 17, 18 years old. He was a poor person. He lived in the masjid of the Prophet in the back. He was a homeless person, we would say. He didn't have a business, he didn't have a job. He wasn't shopping at H&M or Hollister or Aeropostale, right? He was barely at the DD, man, with his Baba's debit card and, he had no money. He had no wife. 17 years old. He becomes a little motivated. He becomes, you know how we are. You join an MSA, you start to become more, you want to commit. So he starts to be like a teacher's pet. We call them teacher's pets. Everybody makes fun of the teacher's pet. But the teacher's pet, he becomes the president of the United States. Okay, so you guys don't make fun of the teacher's pet. So he becomes, he starts to commit himself a lot to the Prophet ﷺ. So then the Prophet ﷺ, he tells them, Rabi', man, I see you trying to do your best. Why don't you give me a wish? Not, not the genie in the bottle, but the Prophet ﷺ's wish is a guarantee. Prophet of God asks Allah, man, bada bing, bada boom, you're good to go. So Rabi', the Prophet ﷺ tells him, give me a wish, I'll make dua for you. Ask me for something and I'll ask Allah for you. So it's guaranteed. So Rabi''s like, you know what? Ya Rasulullah, let me think about it. I'll come back. I'll get back to you on that. He comes back the next day. Imagine a 17-year-old kid. He goes up to him and he says, O Messenger of Allah, the only wish I want is murafataka fil Jannah. I want to be next to you in Jannah. The Prophet ﷺ, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, if you guys read the hadith, he's like, what? It's like, you don't want like a nice Kim Kardashian styled wife in the club? You don't want like a thriving business? You don't want, you imagine this maybe no-name Sahabi goes to the Prophet and says, oh Messenger of Allah, I start to think, if I can ask anything in this life, whatever I ask for, it will come and it will go. But if I ask for something in the next life, I thought it would exist forever. And then I thought, what better thing could I have than being next to you? And you're in the top of paradise. You're on the summit of the mountain of paradise. So Rabi'i bin Amir tells the Prophet, I want to be next to you. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's a little taken back. He's like, yeah, Rabi'i, come on, man. Did Abu Bakr tell you to say that? Or did Umar, like, give you a cheat sheet, tell you, yo, ask the Prophet? He said, no, wallahi, nobody told me. This is just something I want from my heart. So the Prophet told him, Ya Rabi'i, I'll ask Allah for it. Just help me by making a lot of sujood. Can you imagine the ambitions and goals? Because many of us, because maybe nowadays Islam is tough, man. It's not, I understand, we all go to school, we all live in, it's tough. It's tough to put a headscarf on and go to high school. Or walk down the streets of walk down the halls of CSI without being ridiculed or belittled or debased or humiliated. It's tough to not blast Rihanna and Drake's flow, and it's not an easy thing. It's a tough world to live in. But can you imagine that they were willing to sacrifice anything for that with those lofty goals and ambitions? They didn't care about these little peculiars. They strove for high, great things. So the Prophet ﷺ, he taught us, or he teaches us through them, that these were, and I want to give a story of a sister, because many times also, the sisters, the brothers, yeah, you gotta, get your PhD, become a doctor, become an engineer, or become a doctor, or there's only two choices in life, right? Either you're a doctor or an engineer, or you're a bum. And, your cousin is better than you, or your aunt, that whole thing. But the sisters, you get married and khalas, that's it. Your life is over, that's it. That's more than enough. You just gotta start baking the cake. We call them children. I have a beautiful one. You gotta start baking, start bringing out the brownies. Or it depends, white, anyway. It's like sisters, the companions, the women sahabiyat, they also had lofty goals and expectations, guys. They didn't just say, yeah, I'll just find my soulmate. Never happened. The love of my life, it doesn't happen. It wasn't just like, okay, just live at home. But they strove to be great scholars, ambassadors. Aisha, she was one of the greatest scholars in the history of Islam. Fatma was one of the greatest ambassadors. They all played important parts. Can you imagine a woman that has a baby in the middle of the desert? Asma bin Qais, radiallahu anha. The Prophet was going to Hajj. She was about to have a baby. If you guys have been around a woman that has a baby, y'all know, man, it's not an easy thing, right? She's having a baby, and she is so dedicated to make Hajj with the Prophet. No, I'm going to be amongst that elite group of people. She walks outside, she travels outside of Medina, 20 miles outside of Medina. She has her baby in the middle of the desert. No ambulances, no hospitals, no doctors, guys. No water, no epidurals, no hospital bed. In the middle of the desert. She has her baby in the middle of the desert. After she's done having her baby, she continues and she catches up with the caravan to make Hajj with the Prophet ﷺ. They weren't just willing to, maybe just many of us is like, man, if I could just, if Jannah has projects, I live in Bed-Stuy projects in Jannah, man. I'm good, man. Just give me a one-bedroom studio. Jannah, I'm straight, man. I don't even want those. But the Prophet ﷺ told us, if you ask for Jannah, you don't just ask for the projects. Jannah doesn't have projects, like, if it did. You don't just ask for the projects in Jannah, you ask for Al-Firdaus Al-A'la. Don't ever ask for be lowly. Aim high and have great ambitions. Last but not least, before I close, the Prophet, the companions, guys, whenever they made mistakes, they wouldn't run around in circles. They wouldn't like we do, no, but ma, pa, no. They didn't do none of that. Whenever they made a mistake, they would admit that they made mistakes. And many of them, guys, they weren't perfect. They weren't robots, they weren't angels, they made a lot of mistakes. But the difference between Adam and Shaitan, the difference between the Sahaba and us and many Muslims today, is that the companions were willing to admit mistake and to repent. Whereas today, many of us, we make mistakes, and it's just like, we blame everybody else. It was my dog, it was my, we don't have a dog, I know. Unless you're mannequin, maybe, Anyway, it's like, it was my cat, my little brother, my little sister, my friends. We always blame everybody else, but we never blame ourselves. We never point the finger at ourselves to change. The companions, what made them great, what made them build the greatest civilization in history, was that they were being willing to be responsible for themselves, no matter who they were or what status that they had. And I want to give